Hello, friends. We have a topic today that is not, it's rough. Okay. We're going to approach it from two situations. Essentially, here's the thing. And then you can decide if you want to listen to the rest of it or not, because it doesn't get less rough. It's going to be a more heavy topic today because in Florida, are we shocked that it's Florida? Not really. In Florida, a woman went into a hospital and shot her 70-something-year-old husband. It was a pact kind of that they had that like, hey, I'm not doing well. Let's just end this now. It caused obviously a whole lot of panic and trouble because a lot of other people are in the hospital, not just these people. And they had to like evacuate floors. The whole thing lasted like many hours. It was sort of a hostage situation and it wasn't great, right? And obviously there's two different sides to this, right? We have the side of like, how did you even get into a hospital for this to happen? Like with a weapon. As a healthcare person, it's like, I'm so sick of seeing people entering hospitals and healthcare settings with weapons. And then on the other side of the conversation, there's also this screams like desperation. What could possibly make someone get to a point where they were willing to do this? And this seemed like their only option. And I am fortunate today in that I don't have to talk about this by myself. We have some people here to join me, our wonderful panel, and a lot of them who have a lot of experience with palliative care, end of life type of things, and have big feelings and are going to like talk and advocate from that perspective with us. So welcome, panel. Thanks for being here. Chat, thanks for being here. Replay people, thanks for being here. Yeah, if you have any questions also for any of our people of the panel that we can address at the end, leave those, just like address it as, I don't know, panel question. Someone come up with a clever thing to call them, and then we can talk about them at the end. Any initial thoughts? Oh, pupper sighting.
Initial thoughts. My initial thought is these people must have been really desperate, or they must have felt really desperate to be put in this situation.
Yep. I agree. I think
my thought that went literally hand in hand is that not only are they feeling super desperate, but they don't feel like they can actually talk to the providers about end-of-life planning or end-of-life care, which, especially for this population, is something that needs to be addressed faster and more aggressively to let people actually know what goes on.
Yep.
And what the options are.
Exactly. And one of the goals of having the stream, like any of these streams, like we try to do is we do try to make them like educational and give you some things to go away with. So we will be talking about things you can, like resources that you can use if you need to have these conversations, kind of raise awareness of what your options actually are, things that you can do if you weren't affected by this, but you would like to see change in this entire arena. Hopefully we'll have some of those for you. Adrian's here. So Adrian's going to tell us how to change the world. So we're pretty much golden. Okay.
Hi.
Let's do a brief rundown of what went down. Okay. And Zoe, I'm going to be talking about probably next week, the whole Florida situation with the fake nursing diplomas, because that's a whole hot mess. Right. Okay. Here is the situation. So I'm going to, I don't know. I muted you, Cal and Chad, because I'm echoing back in one of yours and I couldn't figure out who it was. So don't try to talk. Warning. So basic rundown of the situation in case you have not heard of this. So this happened in Daytona, Florida. Gilland, I guess is her last name, was charged with first-degree murder and 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. This was in Volusia County. She's being held without bond at this county jail. This happened, essentially. The police chief came out and said that it was 11:30 a.m. and it lasted till like 3 or 4. She planned to take it came out later. Her husband was planning on harming himself with it, but then he was not strong enough to do it. So then she ended up doing it for him. And then she planned to also harm herself, kind of in like a pact situation. But that second half of that plan didn't end up going through. Apparently because her husband was terminally ill, they had conversations about it and they had actually planned this 3 weeks ago. So this is someone who's approaching end of life. They've been sick for several weeks and things are not going well. And that if he had continued to take a turn for the worse, that he wanted her to end this. So him asking her, and this is not like uncommon. Especially I have heard many things in working in primary care where I was like, don't tell me that, like just stop speaking, do not say any more words, when it came to like someone not wanting to slowly die at the end of their life. Apparently the goal was for him to do it, but he did not have the strength, so she had to carry it out for him. While authorities negotiated with Gilland, other patients and staff were evacuated from the area, according to the news release from the police department. Young called it a logistical nightmare because the shooting happened on the 11th floor, which included terminally ill. So terminally ill is they're not going to get better. Patients on ventilators. It was in the ICU and it was filled with a lot of people who were just very, very ill. Authorities didn't have enough room to evacuate the entire floor, so they evacuated the most important rooms. The standoff was, I thought this was interesting. If you guys work at the Daytona Advent Health System, do you have metal detectors? Because they were like, it's not clear how his wife got into the hospital with a gun. I was like, well, like, if you don't have metal detectors, it's very easy. Like I just kind of like laughed, which was cynical. I was like, what do you mean? How did they get in? They probably just waltzed in like you can waltz into like literally almost any other hospital or healthcare system in the world with a weapon. And like the sign on the door that says you can't bring your gun in here is followed by nobody. So not helpful. Now, really quick before, the woman didn't threaten to shoot anyone else. So she wasn't going in there to say like, I'm going to, harm everyone on this floor if this doesn't happen. This was very much an isolated incident. However, that doesn't make it okay. And we'll talk about like what is not good. What is obviously this whole thing is not, it's not legal and not great that someone felt driven to do this. We'll talk about it from like a healthcare employee stance. Like if I worked on this floor, I would be horrified, right? Because I don't want people coming into my workplace and shooting people. That sounds awful. That should not be something that we are worried about when we go into work. And this happens all the time in healthcare situations, and people just don't seem to care. Hospitals don't care. They don't want to put up metal detectors because it makes it look scary. And it makes it, seem like, oh, like, am I not safe here? I don't care about how it looks. It would be nice if they would just care enough to actually do something about it. And metal detectors wouldn't solve all the problems in the world, but like it would help a little bit. If this also sends rage into your soul, quick thing that you can do, because we keep hearing stories. I mean, we've covered on this channel several stories about people getting shot in hospitals recently, within the last month or two. If you would like to see improved safety for people who work in all social services, so it's like education, all the things, social services, in the Senate at the moment, in the, which committee is it? I have a link in just a second. They are proposing, they have this bill that went through the House already. It already passed in the House, and it is the Workplace Violence Prevention for Healthcare and Social Services Act. Please write your senator. I have the list of who, if you live in these states, you should write your senator about it. And ask for them to support this bill. Basically, it just says that it's going to hand over and require the Department of like Health to actually provide safety. Like your hospital has to make sure that you're kind of safe, because right now it's just up to them and they're doing a bad job at it. And we would really like it if they had some kind of like law that said like, hey, when people go to work, like in the hospital, they should probably be kept safe. These are the humans that if you live in this state, it's the Committee Leadership for Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. If you live in these states, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Nevada, Colorado, these states, look at your screen. I have a link below. I'm not going to read them all. That means you have people in this committee who can help vote on these things and make changes. I have already emailed Robert Casey Jr. Gets a lot of correspondence from me. He probably knows who I am and hates me. But especially if you have someone if you live in one of these states, that means you have someone on one of these committees in your Senate. Please write them and just say why you think it would be lovely to support this bill. I've linked it down below. I've linked who your senators are down below so you can go find it. And that I think is the most actionable thing we can do in terms of like getting more safety type things going in terms of metal detectors and keeping people safe at work. Thoughts on that half of it?
Well, I think that, we know, those of us who have been in hospitals during this period where there's like, workplace violence, these bills have been in California where I'm at, and they have to do training. We all know it's just a giant money-making scheme, right? It's just about putting a lot of money in some vendors' hands, some people that work in security, whatever, whoever these people are. I mean, they're making a ton of money getting contracts with these large hospital organizations. It does nothing. I have yet to ever hear of any single healthcare individual, and I'm going to challenge anybody, please, when you're watching this later or now, have you ever been in a situation in healthcare where you looked back on that training, if you had that training, and thought, oh, wow, I'm really glad I had that training because I didn't already learn how to de-escalate in nursing school, or I didn't already, I mean, maybe some folks don't. I mean, maybe in some job classifications, okay, maybe they do see a benefit and they get something out of it. But those are not the folks that are typically at the front and center of, as we know statistically, of violent acts in the workplace, right? It's nurses. It's nurses, it's CNAs, it's nurses and CNAs and LVNs, right? It's frontline. Never. We talked about this last night on a live on TikTok. And so it's a huge moneymaker. It's not solving any of the problem. We now have the data from 2019. We're getting the data from 2020, but a lot of that data was actually suspended during emergency orders during COVID in 2020. Like in California, hospitals did not have to report violent workplace issues and rates. So we're going to have very skewed data for a couple years, but it's really important that nobody believe that data. That the data is way, way bigger than whatever gets reported for 2020, 21, and 22. But on the other side of this, it is just a horrifically tragic situation. And I just feel like we've just lost control of like the environment of care. The environment care is like the Wild West now.
That people feel like they have to do that in order to
and it's not about
what they need.
Right. And it's not about DNR. So I don't want anybody to oversimplify this about DNR. DNR means do not resuscitate if, you stop breathing, right? This is about whatever situation was going on with this person medically, and maybe they didn't want to be just languishing until they passed and be in pain, be miserable, be feeling however they were feeling, right? So there's a lot of things at play here. It's death with dignity. It's, it's assisted unaliving. It's mental health issues. It's advanced directive planning, making your plans known. It's people that are aging without having any family members. And let me tell you, the highest rate of unaliving, if I'm not, let me see, it is, and I was just shocked when I just looked this up. Among males, the unaliving rate, self-unaliving rate, was highest for those age 75 and older, right? 1 in 4 seniors will attempt to self-unalive versus 1 in 200 below that age.
Which is horrifying. Like absolute. And that is absolutely representative, if not like, again, another statistic where it's kind of like, I don't know if that's even like accurately reported. The number of people. So I'm a nurse practitioner. I used to work in primary care, of people who told me their plans for going to do something and like they were terminally ill. They were not going to live like terribly much longer. And when you just had to be like, just please don't say more words. Like, please don't say any other words. Cause then I don't want to go down the path of having to, ask you all these questions and make a safety plan. Clearly you don't like, that's not what you want. Because like you said, there's a huge difference between people passing away. Like that's a process for a lot of people. It's not a quick thing and it's not a fun thing. And I think what a lot of people who make a lot of the laws that we will talk about is I don't know if they've ever seen people die and how long that can take and what that process can look like. And we'll talk about some of the counter arguments of people who don't want to pass any legislation that could help move these things forward. And a lot of it is very much like, oh, like it just needs to happen naturally. You're trying to play like God, do all this other stuff. And it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but I have, and it's awful like, that is not a good process in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. Mother Earth Garden Club says, we're not a country that values our seniors. I'm 73 and lucky to have a loving family. We are not a country that values people that are older in any way, shape, or form. at all.
There's a great book. The book is better than the movie, but the movie is very good. It's in French. It's The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. I required all of my CNA students to read that book. It was non-optional. I just made up that rule and told the owner of the school that was my rule. And Mel, you know the book. It is, everybody should just read that book, and like if you're older than 16, because it will give you a really literally firsthand view of what somebody's going through and their thoughts. This book was dictated with the blinking of an eye, letter by letter, by
Oh my gosh.
a famous fashion publisher, I think Elle magazine in France, and he had a massive stroke while driving, and he had locked-in syndrome. And his occupational therapist, I believe it was, or PT, dictated it with him, letter by letter, through the blinking of his eye. Because that was all he had, was one eye.
Wow.
That was all he could move. So, these issues are, if we're healthy, we're great, right? But the mental health issue here is not even about physical health also. So there's two different components here. There's, if I get to this place, I don't want to be around anymore physically. But then there's also like, I'm just living in angst and I'm sad and I'm depressed and I need mental health. And, as many of you may know, right, the VA now is offering full access to any veteran, all veterans in acute crisis, suicide crisis, fully paid by the reimbursed private providers, fully accessible as of January 17th. So please share that. But yeah, there's a lot of things that we have to talk about and we don't want to talk about in our society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do not like talking about end of life stuff, even remotely, which is interesting because it's the one thing that we'll all do. Right?
It's sad and frustrating because in the United States, we feel like people should live forever.
Mm-hmm.
I worked a SNF for a year, and Cal, you can address this much better than I can.
It's a
I had
skilled
a
nursing
couple
facility.
I had a couple of patients. One old fellow was 102, and his family had him as full code. Why? How long do you expect this man to live? And then there's a couple of other patients. They had some kind of traumatic brain injury and were literally vegetables. Well, and I asked around, how long has this person been here? Oh, 20 years, 23 years. Why? Why
Yeah.
do we
What
not
does that
just
quality of life actually look like?
I mean, there's no function above the brainstem. We turn them every 2 hours. We change their diapers. We tube feed them. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we not just let these people go?
Mm-hmm. And I think if you asked a lot of healthcare people, would you receive, like a lot of healthcare people have living will, like things that they would like to happen if they were to become ill, because we've seen it and we're scared of it. And we're like, no, thank you. I will like to make that choice while I'm like of sound mind. Like Mr. Midwife is like, nope. Like if you find me, please don't, like DNR. That's not a thing that a lot of people I feel like know. But if you look at healthcare people, they're the ones who are like, yeah, like, no, just we're done.
No.
Like, let's be done. I would say most people that I know that I've taken care of as patients, even in the hospital, it was usually the people who have seen a lot of the healthcare thing that were the ones who were just like, you know what, this sucks, but I'm just going to go home and, let's not drag this out for 8 years. And obviously everyone gets to decide what they want to do, but I think we don't talk about it enough. Like you said, and we are not good at giving people options for what they would like.
Well, and it's sad losing a loved one. It's sad to watch somebody that you love die. But do your grieving, turn the page, and get on with your life. Let me get on with my existence or non-existence. Turn the page, close the book, finish the chapter, move on.
Yep.
And not having the discussions doesn't make it easier. I would argue that it makes it harder in whatever way it does play out.
Yep.
Yeah, it does.
I would say that really depends in my experience. I've seen a lot of families where the parents never really made any decision One of them has a major stroke, and now they're, well, do we need to put a peg tube in them because they're not really swallowing? Do we want to, do we want to try and rehab this to get them back to 100% or 80% or 30% or, and one of the downsides of the commercial healthcare system that we have, because it's a corporation designed to make money, is we say, hey, look, we can fix this with the appropriate input of funds. And the thing is that a lot of times I will use one of two examples. One, I'll talk about animals, because a lot of times people have had a pet who can barely move anymore, isn't really continent, can barely make it, isn't comfortable. They're eating this like mush of food and barely picking at that. And you can tell that they aren't happy. And a lot of times, we talk about the humane thing to do is to go ahead and, take them to the vet and put them down. Because their life there's not quality of life there. There's vital signs, they're breathing, their heart rate's still there, but there's not quality of life. The other example I give is everybody has had that old junker car that you have tried to put off buying a new one, and okay, well, I'll spend $3,000 to fix the cracked hoochmacoos or whatever they are. Not really a mechanic. The axles, the whatever else. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get some new tires. I'll replace all the ball bearing fluid for the tires because I'm at $300,000. I'll, do this. And there's a point at which you just have to look at it and say, this car, we are putting so much work and effort into this car, and we just need to let this car go and let it go to the junk. If there are good parts to be used, if we want, or if they want, let's send them to people who can use them. And it's sad to say, it's always hard giving up what effectively brings you your money for years. It's very hard to give up an animal who, you've been walking, taking care of, and whatnot. But the bottom line is that so many times we focus on how it will make us feel, and we think we will feel worse without them here because that means they're gone. When we really need to recognize that they're already gone, it's just the crust around them hasn't left.
The crust. Oh, that is, but I completely agree. Yeah. And looking at like what your quality is, you know what I mean? But the crust is a funny term. I just,
that topped your automotive terminology.
Yeah. just the crust bits. And so I think that's an excellent insight. And you guys, if you don't know, Merce Cal works in long-term in skilled nursing facilities. So he's going to see a lot of this because a lot of people who are there are going through a lot of end of life types of things, especially if they've been there for a really long time. So I guess, and while we're on the topic of like advanced, making these decisions, that's, I think, the first thing that I would encourage everyone, if you're watching this, to have the conversation no matter how young you are, because I cannot tell you how many times I have taken care of people who were in accidents or freak things that then rendered them completely, like on total like life support. This is a good website, and you can have these conversations with your healthcare provider. They won't think you're weird. They might feel weird about bringing it up. And if you are a healthcare provider, please get over it in the kindest way possible. And I let people know when they're new to, when I was practicing, when they were new to my practice, like the first time I met them, I said, we're not going to have this conversation today, but I need you to know that my job here is to just literally help translate health information for you and make sure that you are set up for success. And one of those things is setting your family up for success and you in the event that something awful happened to you. So we're going to have a different appointment and it's billable. If you're like, oh, no one will ever, it is a billable appointment and it's end of life planning and you get together and I would bring up, depending on what state we were in, but you can find your own if you go to advanced care planning and then your state, every state has its own form that you can fill out. And I would say, we're going to go over this. It's going to be kind of uncomfortable, but it's going to go through everything that you don't know, every decision you don't know you have to make and your family doesn't know. And I can't even tell you the number of times that people came back and they said, I hated you when we did that because that was very awkward, especially since I just met you. But like this happened to them and the spouse would come back and they were like, I knew exactly what they want. Like they wanted this, they didn't want that. Things that you might not think about, everyone thinks about CPR. Do you want to be intubated? Do you want, some people, like, it's helpful to have those appointments so people can explain to you that if you want meds, but you don't want CPR, there's no point because you're not circulating the blood. You see in the hospital, you would see all sorts of interesting, we called them like DNR, DNI sheets where it's just like, do not resuscitate, do not intubate. But it wouldn't make sense because you're like, I don't think that was explained well. Cause they'd be like, give me the meds, but you don't need to do chest compressions. I'm like, how's the blood getting around, my friends? But also things like, what kind of organ donation do you want to do? They'll probably ask for your eyeballs. Like that's very common. Do you want a feeding tube? How long do you want this to be prolonged? Because that's something a lot of people don't even think about is, do I want to be tube fed? Are we going to put a tube into your stomach and feed you that way? These types of things are super helpful. I will leave this linked in the description, but it just gives you a checklist, even if you aren't going to a healthcare provider, to make a list with your family of literally the things. Do we want CPR? Do we want a ventilator? Do we want artificial feeding or like a tube feed? What does it all mean? And what can you start to think about? It goes into organ donation. It goes into, do you have like financial things set up? Like, please tell someone else your passwords. It gives you a structure to actually go through and like what you actually need for that, which I think is usually pretty helpful because we're not taught that in high school. When I rule the world, we will be. That'll be a weird day. We'll be like, all right, everyone who's 17, let's plan your death. Great. Wonderful. Get out your paper. Let's go. But we're not there yet.
So I've been having these conversations off and on with my own family for about 30 years, and they're not as hard to bring up as you might think. As you're sitting there watching a movie and a certain scene comes up or something happens, pause the movie. What if that happens to me? If that happens to me, I want this to play out. A couple years ago, I swabbed dirty for COVID, and I've already had these conversations with my wife and kids several times, but I did send out a new text message. I've just been diagnosed with COVID. If the worst happens, here's what I want. And nothing's changed really in the last 30 years. I'm still DNR. I still want this. I still don't want that, so on and so forth. And it's good to refresh that conversation from time to time. You see an article in the news, you see some on TV, you watch a movie, bring it up again. Just to reiterate that, yeah, we have had a conversation about this about a dozen times, and Dad always said he wanted A, B, and C.
Yep. Yeah.
So there's very little argument.
True signs you're in a healthcare family. So like that was our dinner conversation, like all the time. Or like my mom will I'm very aware of like everything because we talk about because it's just like she's a nurse and then we just have all the healthcare things. She'll like literally divvy out all of her possessions. She's like, so when I die, like when we're gone, like we're gonna like this is this, and like I'm like that's such a normal conversation. But if you don't work in healthcare, I don't think it is. But it's very funny and it throws people off who aren't used to it. My friends in high school I remember my mom said something one time. She's like, when I die, like something about like when I die, like pawn this one off before that one. That my friend was like, oh my gosh, like I'm not prepared. And J. Michael brings up a good point that make sure if you do get an advanced directive type of thing written down, make sure it's done correctly. It has to be done. The form has to be the right way. In Florida, it has to be on yellow paper, apparently. Every state has their own. You have to, some of them, and this just gets tricky when no one is there, right? If you have a family, like if you're in Chad's situation, right, and your whole family is very much on the same page, and you have a family who's going to honor the wishes of that person, that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be like as official, but I always tell you to get everything as official as possible, because you never know when the one kid or something is like, no, like we're going to do all of it. We're going to go all the way. Like, you know, you never know. You just never know. So do make sure it's legit. And yes, love this in labor and delivery. Before you go have a baby, please do this.
Mhm.
Please do this. That is one of the riskier things we do in life. So
The
please do that
Well,
first.
now that you bring up my wheelhouse, labor and delivery is just the same.
Mhm.
Yeah, in my 20 years of practice, I've been present when at least 2 to 3 moms have not made it through the situation. And it's dangerous, it's scary, and it is sad as hell. I'm not going to lie. But then you get babies that deliver early. You get a 20 week or a 22 week or something like that. At 20 weeks, 22 weeks, 24 weeks, we can make you live.
Mhm.
Liz, you're a pediatric nurse. You know this. I can force life upon you, but then you've got a dead bowel and you'll never absorb nutrients. I'm giving you so much oxygen that's deteriorating your retina. You're going to go blind and you'll never leave the hospital. I can keep you alive for the next 40, 50, 60 years. It's not going to be a life. You're going to end up under Cal's care, because that's where you're going to spend all of your days. That's not fair to me. It's not fair to the baby. It's not fair to the parents. Why can we not just let people go?
We struggle with that.
the having had this conversation with my parents this past year, one of the complications that I have is that we believe minorly different things, and because of that, they're slightly skeptical of my viewpoints on things. Be willing to have these conversations multiple times. Like, engage what other social members they have. And, in this case, I would talk to my brother, I would talk to my sister and say, hey, look, we're going to kind of take turns and prod. Like, I've planted this seed kind of the same way we did with the COVID vaccine stuff. Like, I've planted this seed. I need you to water it a little bit. Because it's not a decision that's going to be made overnight for the vast majority of people. A lot of people don't understand what goes into CPR. A lot of people don't understand that an artificial feeding tube, like a peg tube, which goes through the stomach or goes through the abdomen to the stomach to provide nutrients, most of the time that they put those in, they intend those to be reasonably permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't want to see this person laying in bed, getting fed that way for the end of time, if you aren't willing to take that, I would recommend saying, hey, look, we don't, if we can try IV hydration for a little bit, but to the point at which that's no longer going to work, let's call it. And you really have to go in there with, a variety of facts. Like, hey, look, even a great resuscitation rate for CPR is 40%. So if we start CPR on somebody and we bring them back to get a pulse, and where they're still going to have vital signs, that's a 40% quote unquote win rate. And that win rate, the only thing that we're checking is to make sure that there's vital signs for basically 24 hours. That doesn't preclude this happening again. This doesn't preclude, because you've been out of oxygen for so long to your brain, you've got an anoxic brain injury and are no longer able to speak or move almost any limb.
Mm-hmm.
There are, my personal recommendation, and again, this is based on my beliefs, what I think would be best for me. If I had kids up until my kids were about 21 or I hit 50, I would be a full code to that point. But after that, a lot of times the statistics are going to be, it's going to be too heavy of a cost. And once you start to reach 70 or 80, the numbers are falling dramatically. And that's, again, still, if it's caught early, if you get high quality CPR, if people recognize these things, and it's never fun to approach death. But with as much as birth is a part of life, death is an equal part. And the thing that kills me about this scenario is that these people were not either willing, able, or comfortable talking with the healthcare workers to say, hey, look, I don't have this fight in me anymore. I don't want to, I want to say in this case it was cancer. Like, I don't have another round of chemo in me.
Mm-hmm.
I've had so many patients who went through a round or two of chemo. There have been so many guys that I've talked to who have had testicular cancer who are like, if I came out of remission and got it again, I wouldn't do chemo again because it's so exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would recommend talking to families and saying, having these discussions, especially if you have a history of breast cancer, especially if you have a history of colorectal cancer or prostate cancer or, a number of fast things, because there are a number of medical procedures that are, if you do it once, it's a miracle. And I'll count it, chalk that up on the board. But doing it 2 or 3 times, I can't imagine where people get the energy from it. And when you're trying to fight that when you're 70 or 80, I mean, Lord, trying to have chemo now, all I want to do is lay in bed and sleep.
Already, yeah.
Like, I already don't want to do a round of chemo.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And the alternative, I think, especially in like a case like this, where it's just like, oh, well, if you don't, I couldn't find what his diagnosis was. But even if you just say no, like, I don't want it, like you said, clearly there was not a good conversation that was being had there, because even just like withdrawing care can sometimes lead to a very slow decline that's really miserable. And there's not always a great way to alleviate that. I also saw this comment in the chat that I thought was a good point. Mother Earth Garden Club had said that their mom had a surgery on their hip, but even though they were DNR, they did surgery since she was in surgery, they did resuscitate her, and they were not the same like afterwards. And J. Michael brought up a good point that if you opt for surgery, surgeons they don't, like, DNR in a lot of places isn't valid in the operating room because the surgeons don't want to damage their survival rate. And that is that's a whole thing that's like a whole different aspect of the healthcare system that we're in. That's at least in the US. I don't know if that's in other countries, but here it's all about your numbers. How are you going to be able to market that, of your survivability, your outcomes? So they will not they're going to do everything to get you out of that operating room alive. And then it runs into a lot of issues of, do you, like in the case of this person's mom, like, do you just not fix their broken leg then? Or what do you do? Then like it's a mess. It's a whole mess. And yeah, okay. For Megan, she said it's the same thing for her facility. And the thing is, like, what do? We like talk about, like, you can kind of raise awareness of it. And if like, that's really the only thing we can do in terms of that, is eventually making enough people know about it, that it's no longer than just accepted norm. You know what I mean? Of like, this is what it is. But I don't see that changing as long as we have the healthcare system that we do.
Yeah. One thing that's also really important on that issue of DNR and surgery, right? So yeah, your DNR is going to be canceled. That order in the order set in when you're hospitalized is going to be canceled, discontinued. But then it also has to be resumed. And a lot of times that's forgotten because doctors and providers are not always good at resuming orders. And in some situations, all the orders have to be rewritten. So if you go to a different level of care, they all have to be rewritten. If you go from ICU, maybe you recovered in ICU and then from there, they didn't resume your DNR
Even just
status.
a procedure that requires sedation or something a lot of times. Yeah.
Exactly, Mel. Exactly. And so it's really important. There's also some very interesting data about this, about DNRs. Patients with DNRs have worse outcomes that are not related to their health status.
Explain.
So listen to that. It's the perception that you're a DNR. So possibly, again, could be the perception by providers, by the care team, that you're a DNR and you're not actually getting the level of care that somebody who is a full code would be getting. So there's a mismatch in the data. So be really careful about reading that data about DNRs and surgery. So like DNR patients have 28% mortality or something post-surgical. But there is some deeper data about that shows that when you eliminate the DNR status and you just correct for disease process against the same group of people that are full code, the numbers are not matching. And so there's something going on here that's not being accounted for in the care being provided to patients.
I was aware of that, but haven't looked at the nuance of it. Do you happen to know if there's anything showing if that's more about care being provided or decisions being made by patients, like, other treatment decisions being made by patients, or maybe some of both?
I think that it is the decisions being made by the care team.
Okay, that was my inclination, but I just wasn't sure. Yeah,
these are decisions and orders and care that are being made. This is not. I don't see that indication in what I've reviewed that says, "Oh, this person didn't, follow their post-surgical
didn't
plan,
pursue other things,
or they didn't take care of their drain, or they didn't do what they were supposed to do." So I haven't seen that. Not to say that's not a causative factor. I don't know, but it sounds. I mean, we're talking about in-hospital mortality, like within 3 days, right? So we're talking about the short window.
So very acute, yeah.
Right. So there is, or on the table. So there are worse outcomes there that cannot be explained by when you adjust all the data. So this is very important that we understand our own biases, right? So there's a bias, right? It's like saying Black patients get worse care, or they, or have worse outcomes. Does that mean Black people have worse health factors? No, it means there's bias in healthcare. So this is another place of bias in healthcare, I'm going to say. And it could be at all different levels in the healthcare system. It could also be in the insurance. It could be somewhere, case management. It could be maybe they're not getting all of, the post care that they need, or home health. I don't know.
Resources. Yeah.
Right. Resources.
It almost felt like, at least when I worked in the hospital, it almost felt like if some people were DNR, that it kind of reduced the effort of the amount of mental gymnastics that people were willing to go through in order to seek out like treatment plans. And it was almost like, oh, like we have this patient, blah, 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 their DNR, let's, and they would try, right? But it wasn't
last on the list.
Exactly. But you were kind of going to be, like the last
That's
one
what I
mentally,
wondered,
where you were going to go and like, how can I possibly get this person to like get better or like do X, Y, and Z? Ours would even announce it like when they were in rounds, which I always thought was weird. They would announce the patient and they would announce their code status, like to make it known. But that was like one of the introducing factors, of, oh, we have an 18-month-old with blah, 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 blah. They are DNR. And then you would go on, and it set the vibe very much of like, so we are gearing towards like comfort, when that was not at all necessarily the goal. The goal of that was just the parent saying, hey, I'm just sick of like, if it does happen, this happens, but please, goodness gracious, let's do everything possible so that we don't have to face that situation. But the tone was often there, even if it wasn't said. Megan, right? The DNR does not equate do not treat. And a lot of people kind of forget that. So just be aware of that, I guess. Like if you don't feel like you're being listened to or heard and you do have a DNR or something like that, it's okay to bring attention to that. Be like, hey, I have concerns. I have feelings. Worried. I think that's a great point. Thanks for bringing it up.
Well, but part
Um,
of the point for bringing up DNR in handoff or report is because I can't tell you the number of times I had a DNR patient in the sniff, and I'd have some CNA get excited and they'd start CPR, and once you start it, you
oh yeah.
cannot stop it,
hmm
and you go back to the book, you'd say, "Why did you start CPR?
hmm Oh yeah.
She's
And
103 years old. She's DNR. Why did you start?
hmm
Now we got to
yeah.
finish."
Oh, for
So
sure. It's definitely a double-edged sword. Like, especially, I think we need better. I don't know. I feel like that happened more than it ever should have. Uh, Better ways to communicate that, like everywhere. And you
let's
used to
keep
have signs above their bed, on the monitors, like everywhere. And people would still.
to keep it fresh in everyone's mind. Don't,
And that's a reminder to everybody here with family members in the hospital or in a skilled nursing facility or long-term care, any kind of healthcare situation, to make sure that they have the appropriate armband on for a DNR status and that the chart is flagged or whatever the protocol is. Ask at the hospital or the facility, what are the protocols for identifying patients that are DNR? I want to know, right? And I'll share with you guys a personal story. My parents passed a long time ago. My mother had MS. She was a DNR, and she was in the hospital. She was transferred. She went through a very rough the last 4 months of her life. Was very sick, and part of that was some neglect at the skilled nursing facility she lived at. But then what happened was, we were like, okay, well, I guess things are going downhill, and so we're gonna, kind of plan. But between transfers, between rooms in a hospital, levels of care, she was coded by a new nurse. Her chart wasn't flagged. She didn't have an armband on. And this nurse coded my mom, performed CPR, and which then led to, intubation, a trach, being on a ventilator, a horrific dying process that we had no way to do anything about. And then again, actually, when she actually did pass, it turned out they did CPR again.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, and it was, and I had just actually, this is so interesting. This has been 17 years. I just like revisited some of the medical records there because I thought something is really bothering me that I couldn't figure out. And I thought, why did they code her at the SNP? I mean, there's just no way. I mean, it was a horrible situation at the end of my mom's life. And, so if there had been any way for me to, I know that it was not how she wanted to be ending her life. Like she drilled all of us throughout our lives. She drilled me as a kid, it was like the Royal Tenenbaums, like, pull the fire alarm. What are you going to do? Right. And so please make sure that if you're a healthcare provider, you've got everything marked appropriately. But if you're a family member and a patient, make sure that your, status is known. Right. And if you're a family member, put a sign up above the head of the bed, make it known, because I have even taken care of private duty patients at Cedars-Sinai, at UCLA, at major hospitals where I knew that patient should have been a DNR. And when I went and asked the nursing staff, I said, well, I don't see the DNR. Where's it in the chart? I got the, oh, well, I don't want to call the doctor. It's too late. I don't want to deal with it. These are oncology patients. So again, don't assume the care environment is like some fabulous, hospital. It doesn't matter. There are things that fall through the cracks everywhere. And these are orders that have to be written every single time a patient comes in the hospital. And these things and these, advanced directives are not portable across state lines, which is so frustrating in this country.
Yep.
That's another thing. It's so frustrating. So if you go to a cruise and you fly across country or you're on a road trip, your advanced directive does not count. And states like Wisconsin, I put in the chat, I just recently found out, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a not a next of kin state. I didn't even know that existed.
I didn't even know that existed either.
Yeah. So apparently in Wisconsin, it doesn't even matter what your family wants. You don't even make a decision. It's made by a provider group or panel or
What?
something. Yeah,
That's socialized
That's
medicine.
absurd.
but
That
it's
is
not.
Like that's absurd
It's
in
not
the thing that we
socialized
have.
medicine. If this is a medicine, this is the United States, right? I mean, so and I mean that's what's so crazy, right? Because we were talking about how I had that one crazy case of like the three families, the three wives, and like who was the decision maker, and then kids just wives kept popping out of the woodwork, and so it was like whoever's oldest. We were, talking kind of how you rank it, right? And it's the oldest child, the current wife, but the oldest child, and blah blah blah. And this person who's a social worker informed me, she said, no, we don't. I'm in Wisconsin. We don't even have that. And I was like, what?
Wow.
I'm like, so I had no idea. So I'm like, what? How did that come about?
So I'm gonna blow your mind a little bit here.
I'm ready.
Blow it.
because we haven't done that enough yet today.
In two different ways. One, at every facility that I've worked at in South Carolina, and there's a number, there's no armband, there's no sticker, there's no sign on the door, there's no. Now, on the chart, we might have specific, like, you might have a butterfly, or you might have a this, that, or the other thing that means specific things on the chart itself. But legitimately, anytime we have someone who's non-responsive, not breathing, no pulse, there's a good minute and a half taken up. Let's find the paper copy. Is there a paper copy? Is there a green DNR, a green full code sheet, or is it a red DNR sheet? And if there's a red DNR sheet, do we have the paper copy? Second, and I don't know if this is specific to South Carolina, and this is absolutely insane to me. We can have patients come from the hospital, have a DNR from a physician in the hospital, come into blah, 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 skilled nursing facility. I don't want to say names. And every facility that I've worked at, even though you have a paper copy of a DNR signed by a doctor, because it is not your doctor for your facility, they're a full code.
It's like, why do we make it so hard? Like, why do we make this one of the hardest things?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Like, and again, I understand that having a countrywide electronic medical system can be problematic because people can have the same names and the same birthday and be in similar sections of the country. I get that there are a variety of issues with electronic medical files. However, overall, having a centralized electronic medical service that is, I understand the hatred towards government run, government operated, whatever else. I don't care if you pay the best people, pay Epic, pay MyChart, pay whoever. I don't care, right? But get it so that we can transmit all these documents and they're valid between states, that they're valid within states, that it doesn't matter that, hey, look, if they're able to, if EMS goes out, finds a wallet on a guy, they can just scan their, state ID and see, hey, look, this is Jim Bob Joe Turner, and Jim Bob Joe Turner is a DNR. So, we'll give him Narcan if we think that it might help.
Yeah. And why can't it be linked to something like that? Like your ID, you know what I mean? Like that's a genius idea where you could even even if I am not in that state, like police, if I get pulled over, can still look up my license and know a lot of information about me. So why couldn't they know your code, like information like that? You know what I mean? Like that just doesn't make absolutely any sense.
What if we implanted a chip into my chest so that when you put the defibrillator on, it just stopped the defibrillator? Sent a signal Short
Only
of
if it was
I
your
love
voice
that.
that came out of it and was like, stop immediately.
the chip has to be on your hand or on your forehead, and the number has to have 666 on it.
Okay,
Um,
whatever.
I only accept this as long as it is actually you saying the thing.
So there is actually a company that will house, and I found this, and I just looked them up because they just changed their name. There is a company, and if you do a search, that will house electronically your advance directive, your living will, all the information, and then it can be pulled up by your provider. So they've kind of managed all of the rights of information, HIPAA, and all that. It's not cheap. So it's not cheap. But if you have money, it may not be a bad idea. Now, the provider and the hospital, so what we'll have to obviously know so that they can access this information. But I think that these databases are going to become more common as repositories that hospitals can log into.
So I have mine linked on my like emergency medical bracelet. I don't trust that it would get pulled up. Like I certainly don't rely on it. It's still on file at, any medical place that I regularly go to. But I have mine linked on like my emergency medical thing. That theoretically it's in there if someone were to look that up and find my medical stuff in an emergency.
Just like tattoo a barcode on yourself, and then you just like, it links to a QR
Yeah.
code. It just links to, whatever document you, however often you've updated it, right?
DNR tattoo. My mom keeps saying she's going to get one of those.
They're not legal, but people have tried, and I
Yes.
think it's also
We'd
just
be-
very important. Yeah, people have tried. I've seen those too. Again, it's just really important that people have the conversation. So, I mean, we're not going to solve the problem, here, but start at having the conversations, because most people aren't even in the place of making those decisions. They don't even have the documents in place. So I think Liz is going to put some links, and there's some free resources with the nonprofit that I'm involved with and on the board of. And, I do it as a patient advocate. I, am allowed to do that here in Virginia. The state of Virginia has it it's free. It's a form for free on their website. Very
Ohio
easy to fill
too,
out.
yeah.
And you don't have to get it notarized in Virginia. So you need to check your state. So just having those conversations, start with college, start when your kids go to college. That's the best time, because guess what? Young males are, we know what we call them, right? So, they high risk activity and
prone
it's
to stupidness.
right. And prone to getting into trauma, right? Showing up in a trauma bay. So it's very important that's the place to start, teaching your kids financial literacy, teaching them life literacy, literacy, body literacy, right?
The best place to have these conversations is when you're on a car trip. You're
Yeah,
driving in the car, you
hostage.
can bring it up. They can't get up and
No.
walk away. They're
No, they
committed
cannot.
until you stop at a red light or stop for fuel before they can not hear you anymore. So
Parenting
that's the
advice
best
from
place
Mr. Midwife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really serious conversations are best held at 60 miles an hour.
If
Because
they're
Yes.
not on the
cannot get up,
phone.
they cannot get up and walk away.
I think
Perfect.
that you bring up a good point, and I was just thinking, because kids are on their phone now constantly.
Take the phone from them.
We have one now in our house. We have a kid with a phone nonstop. But I really am going to just challenge every creator watching this in the comments, and challenge other creators. Let's all make a video or two about the importance of advanced directives and having these conversations about planning and what you want, and there's no magic solution, right? Because because there is a lot of components of this that goes into like the death with dignity kind of category, but just to have those conversations and understand and get real with the fact that none of us is getting out alive.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this thing called death doulas, right? Like that's something that I'm looking at adding into my services. It's becoming really huge. It's a huge field right now, because people because they are not able to have these conversations with their family and say, hey, I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to memorialize me. Hey, we've all got this phone in our hand. people want to be memorialized or have certain things done or have certain experiences done, and often their families just are like, no, we're not talking about it.
I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. Yeah.
Right. So they're
That's why
paying
you do it
death
at 60
doulas.
miles an hour. That's exactly why you do it at 60 miles an hour.
Or people don't have kids. They don't have, I don't have kids. I am like no contact with all but like 2 people in my family, right? I'm in that situation. If anybody has kids they'd like me to adopt, I'm looking for kids. So, I'll take a few
or
tomorrow, any day. Right. And right.
Send me your address. I'll get some plane tickets tonight.
I'm
go
the
tell
cool
them to
gay
get in the
aunt.
van now.
I'm cool gay aunt. So it's really important that you have these conversations, you guys, and honor what people want to do. Hey, Scott's here. Just have the conversation. So I want everybody in the chat to commit to have these conversations with one person. Tell one person what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Have that
Yeah.
conversation and then come back in the comments and let us know how it went. Okay. Because we need to do that. What happened to Scott? Where'd he go?
He's at school. He's at school, so he wasn't even sure if he was going to be here. So I think he's probably having internet issues.
Was that a peekaboo?
Yes, but you can use like events like this as a catalyst for conversation. If you're like, I don't even know how to do the assignment that Adrian just gave to me, you can literally say, did you see in the news that lady who shot her husband in the hospital, blah, 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 blah. Like, it made me really think, like, what do I don't want to get to that situation. So like, what do I want? And then you just go. Like, that's how you have the, like, or any segue, like we see there's a lot of really frightening things in the like news. Right. And so like, cause that's the whole point. They want to have that out there. Use anything like that as a story segue so that it's not, like I'm very good at bringing up very awkward, like big things out of nowhere. I'm like, why, yes, I did just buy a purple pillow for my desk chair. Also, if you ever do this to me when I'm dying, like I will haunt you. I will haunt you forever. And people are like, wow, that was an adjustment. I'm like, so you can do it in a more casual way. Also,
you remember that movie we saw last night? That one
Yes.
scene?
Uh-huh.
Remember that scene? I don't ever want that to happen to me. So here's what
Exactly.
I want to happen. And it's that easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. And I wanted to highlight this really quick as a tip of if you are working in a healthcare setting of how to tackle this. Son Leon said, when someone is dying, and if I don't know if they're DNR, I start CPR and I don't run to the desk to look for paper. I don't love this. Please look at their code status. This happens, like I said, and everyone said all the time, where people get CPR is started when it should not be. People deserve to have their wishes respected. I used to, when I worked in the hospital, it's as simple as at the very top of your report sheet. So everyone carries around the little report sheet. There should be a list somewhere at the beginning of your shift where you have a rundown of the whole unit. I would literally write and then highlight it all in yellow, the DNR rooms. And if I went into a room, this probably happened 10 times when I was a nurse. I walk into a room and the person is no longer alive. It takes 2 seconds to whip out your paper and be like, am I doing something about this? Like, in the grand scheme of things, the 20 seconds that it took you, like max, because it's at the top, it's usually a lot easier to be like, am I going to react? How am I reacting to this? That is someone's entire life. Like, you don't want to be like Adrian's, what happened to Adrian's mom is not something that we want, that other people deserve to have to happen to them. So please just write it at the top of your sheet and highlight it and respect that person's wishes. Like, that is worth the 20 seconds, I think. And I don't think any court ever, like if you're worried about getting sued, would ever say like, oh, well, you didn't do that. And then these 20 seconds, this happened. I think they would look at it and be like, oh, okay, you were literally just seeing if you should proceed that way.
And if you're the charge nurse, I did charge. We had 31 beds, right? And sometimes I would have to kind of cover for the other unit that had 31 beds. That was the first thing I would do. I would make sure, go through the list. I'd print the list of all the patients, and I would make sure that I marked off. And then we had the electronic whiteboard. There's all these different means of doing it. And I would make sure, and I'd go around with all the armbands, and I'd go to all the nurses and make sure and verify. I would, say, I want you to check the orders. I want you to check the chart. This is important stuff, because this could be the end of your license. That was the end of that nurse's license, you guys. That was the end of that nurse's license. who was a new nurse. So if you're in California, it will be the end of your license because they do not care. The Board of Nursing does not care. You are expected to know. So when you're rushing around and somebody's saying, oh, go transfer this patient, go do this, go do that. And, you know, they got you running your head off as a nurse or a caregiver. If you're the CNA, and I'm just saying acute care, right? If you're long-term care, I mean, like, I mean, you're not turning over these patients. I mean, you kind of have an idea. You should, you know, have some idea, I'm assuming, of these patients for the most part. But, you know, your CNAs, make sure that they know. If you're a nurse, make sure that the CNAs know. Make sure the monitor tech knows, the secretary knows. Anybody who could be involved, they should know, because you don't want to put anybody else at risk. Because even if nothing happens to you legally, right, you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel terrible if you cause somebody some suffering that they did not want to have happen. It's not a good feeling. You're not going to feel good about it. And I came into nursing after my mom passed, and I made sure I am never going to make that mistake. And I'm going to make sure I educate people, and that you have to be aware what the patients want. Plus, I'm, you know, in California, so it's crazy. The BRN's not playing.
So I just wanted to add as a possible resource, obviously everybody ideally has family or friends to have these conversations with, but if you really want to, or a healthcare provider, if you, you know, want to knock around things with someone and you don't have somebody to do that with, like ethics offices at hospitals can be helpful for that. You know, any place that you get any doctor, anything, if you call them, they generally speaking would be happy to have a conversation with you or help you go through the paperwork. I know years ago when I was having challenges because of medical issues I already had, figuring out how to fill out my forms, because I already had a feeding tube. I already, you know, like, how do I fill them out to fit my reality? You know, I did it when I was inpatient, but they would have been just as helpful if I was, you know, so I just wanted to mention that.
That's really helpful.
Maybe not every tiny hospital has them, but my guess is if you know, call around, or that could be a resource. Second, ask a mortician. I don't know if anybody's familiar. It's not so much the healthcare perspective of it, but she has a lot of great death-related content. If you're somebody who just kind of needs to immerse yourself in some of that, you know, death is okay to talk about and discuss. So I just want to mention her as a YouTube resource.
She's great.
Some great books too. And then lastly, just the idea, I mean, so many healthcare professionals are not able or willing to have these conversations either. And I think that that's just something, I don't think that's the group that's here. But I mean, I know years ago when I was being told by multiple doctors, encouraged to go on hospice in my 20s, I had other doctors that I was trying to have that conversation with because it was being brought up to me. And they were like, oh, just don't talk about that. And that was not helpful. You know, that was not helpful. Now, my guess is that's even worse with younger people, but there's so many people. It's just, so I guess I just want to say, if you've got a healthcare provider that's not able to go there with you, like, don't let that stop you from continuing to reach out to other people or having those conversations, because there are people that will.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point too. Like, especially I've heard a lot of people who don't want to talk about it. They're like, oh, just don't think like that. Like, don't even let yourself get in that
reality
headspace.
change it.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
And talking about it doesn't make it happen either. Cause look, like, I'm here 15 years later. So like having a meeting with hospice that didn't change, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I mean, this is after COVID, right? I mean, this is 3 years that we're in, and everything that, you know, many of us have seen and been through. I mean, it is really kind of shocking that it's not more, I don't know, there's not more deeper penetration of this concept in society and with people to have these conversations, right? But it's, you know, just start wherever you can start, you know, start wherever you can start. And I want to give us a little shout out to Maggie, Nurse Advocate, who's on here live. She's amazing, and maybe someday we'll have her on the panel. But she's in Texas and she's another expert in regulatory licensure, and she had an experience too with her parent, apparently.
Oh, I'm trying to go back and find it. Rachel, look for it and then
I think
start it, and then we can put it up here.
Was only 50 or very young when she passed or got sick, and the father had no idea what her wishes were, right? So I mean, these are conversations to have if you're going to get married, if you're gonna, be in a relationship. Like, I know my girlfriend is not the one to make decisions. Like, I know. I mean, my best friend and my other friend who's a nurse, they can do it. They will do it. They will guide. Again, it's okay if it's not that person. Pick the people who matter, who can make the best decisions for you, and you can also hire somebody to be that role. So understand, you can hire somebody, right? Like, that's part of the services of a private patient advocate, right? That is, you can hire that out as well.
And you want to be the one to pick, my friends. You want to be the one to pick, because otherwise it will default to like your spouse, unless apparently you live in Wisconsin. And I can't tell you the number of times where people would rather it be their child, maybe, who was making the decision. You know what I mean? Like, heaven for, like, you know what I mean? I would probably be the person in my family who, like, it would default to me versus like maybe my dad in a situation, like, because I'm more familiar with it. Like, I know the nitty gritty. You know what I mean? Just like, and it would be nice to know that you picked your person versus the state telling you like you're the person. And sometimes it's like, oh my, that's a choice.
As much as it's great to have the forms filled out, if you did it 10 years ago, make sure to revisit them, because you might have people on there that are no longer your people, or they're no longer capable themselves, or so just remember that, like, they need to be revisited as well.
A court could even rule that it was signed so remotely that it's no longer valid. It needs to be like you said, Mel, updated periodically, every 2 years, every 5 years, every X amount of time. It does need to be updated.
A succession list. In the event of, that's a good way that's like a real life top 8. Going back to like MySpace. You're like, you are chosen. If you fail me, you may enter. And then so on and so forth.
It's important. I mean, because like Mel is saying, things may change. Somebody could pass unexpectedly that's on that list, or maybe you didn't update it.
They're
right?
with you, right?
They could be, right. And this is the other reason why it's very important to have somebody else besides your spouse or your immediate family member be those decision makers. You need to have somebody who's on like the outside, because God forbid, I don't know, it must have been 20, how long? Maybe almost 30 years ago, there was a huge Amtrak accident, I think in the Southeast somewhere. And a lot of people didn't make it out of that. And I worked for a family, and it was the family of the father of the kids I took care of, his brother and the entire family, were lost in that accident. So you could be in a situation. And I had another friend, a nurse, whose mother-in-law, father, sister-in-law, like 5 of them, their car flipped on the way to Vegas. And again, no survivors, but had there been survivors and somebody was supposed to make somebody else's decisions, who was going to be that person? So it's really important, because oftentimes families are together and there could be, accidents that happen, et cetera. So again, these are not morbid conversations. These are the conversations you want to have. And you don't have to have them over and over again, tons of times. But once you crack that egg, it's going to be a lot easier to have the conversation. Trust me, you guys.
It is. And then you get to the creepy point where you're taking off on an airplane and you text your mom when you're with your spouse. You're like, oh yeah, by the way, this is my like, if this happens, this is what I want to know. And your mom's like, excuse me, what? But you're already in the air, out of cell phone service. Don't do it that way either. Maybe. Right. Don't do it that way.
And it's also okay if you make mistakes. I mean, so despite my mother going and reviewing all of her wishes and all of her papers, I still made mistakes. I was convinced that she wanted some burial at sea. I don't know where I got that in my head. So, they sent her down to this place, and they were like, we don't have any record of your mom paying for this or wanting this. And so then we had to we had to move around a few times to get her to the right resting place. But, things happen and it's okay. You know what I mean? Do your best. Just do your best. And
burial is another thing to talk about, right? That's another thing that's like on that list of the thing I'll link below of like, what do you want to happen to your body? Because a lot of people, they don't ever talk about that. Ask a mortician. It's so expensive. Ask a mortician just did a thing on composting. Like, she has all the things that you can do afterwards, and like composting yourself.
There's more options than you'll be led to believe if you call a funeral home.
There's so many options. Some of them are fascinating. And my new obsession is being composted. Since she did a video on that like 2 days ago, I was like, what? I think it's illegal in my state still, but we're going to work on it. That might be my new life passion.
Whole new definition of pushing up daisies, huh?
You know what I mean? I mean, it's like in a pod and they heat it. It looks very, very interesting. Okay,
One
I
thing that I
want.
want to bounce off of this really quick is
Yes.
it's not just important to get these documents done. It's equally important to let and have everyone know where these are. With my parents, I know where their wills are. I know where their power of attorneys are. I know where their financial and healthcare power of attorneys are. I don't actually know who are on those because I'm not quite sure. I don't want to snoop and like I'm not quite sure it's me. But the important thing is it is important to, when you're having these conversations, not just on the healthcare side of things, it's important to also cover the financial side of things. Like, here are our wills. This is what we want for all of this. Here is the mortuary, whatever that we want to use. We want to be cremated. We want to be buried with Nan next to her spot 3 ways down the road. And here's the paperwork for that. Planning ahead of time makes this so much easier, and it takes a lot of the pain and suffering for families out, because there have legitimately been times when a patient has died somewhat unexpectedly, and they've been sitting in the room for over 24 hours, so the facility or the hospital will call the county to pick up the body because they don't know what mortuary or what place to bring them to.
That's a very good point. Logistics. It's like the little stuff that you kind of forget. And you're like, oh, that didn't even occur to me. As a brief chat mouthwash, let us know what you would like to happen to your body after you die. The more creative, the better. If you saw us smirking, it's because Adrienne said that she wanted to have a Tibetan send-off. If you aren't familiar with that, you are put into smaller pieces and then taken up on top of a mountain, and buzzards eat you, which is always fun. I would like to be cremated, obviously, and turned into soil, and then please grow like wine, like grapes out of me, and then turn that grape into wine. That sounds like a great way to go. My sister would like to be turned into a tree. Anyone else? Let us know in the chat what you would like to happen to you. Grassroots would like to have the carbon ashes of her cremation pressed into a diamond. I think it's very reasonable. I don't think that's unreasonable in any way, shape, or form. A Viking funeral, perfect. We did that for our father off the Coast Guard, our long list of rules. Oh, I don't know what's involved in that.
There's a lot. You cannot even go put ashes out at the beach. I learned that. Legally.
You can at 2 a.m. when nobody's watching.
I learned that. Yeah. I learned this.
We did it in the woods. Don't tell, right?
I'm not saying I did any of those things. But yes, it is super regulated, you guys. It's super regulated. So
I want to be cremated and taken up into the mountains and sprinkled near some pine trees.
That sounds very peaceful.
Yeah, that's what I want.
I've been involved in that on the living side. Yes, it feels good for your family. Yeah. So I'll use this as a semi-plug, which is what also I'm doing for body donation to research.
Oh, yeah.
Which can still also be done if you're donating organs. You can do that and then say, okay, anything that they don't use for that, most major hospitals, research centers, schools have that option. And a lot of times, not that you would solely make the decision for that reason, it also means that there's less cost. For you or your family. Funny story along with that is I'm going to Cleveland Clinic and they changed the radius. I just was happening to see on paper something online. They changed the radius of how far they will pick bodies up from. So we're now like 20 miles outside of that radius. My parents are also doing that. And my dad took this on as a project. And apparently now, so you just have to pay to be taken 20 miles. And I joke that, you just pay, get left on the side of the road, then they'll come pick you up. But it can be worked out. But that can be to me, that's a neat way to kind of add on to whether or not you're able to donate organs.
Well, you always wanted to go to medical school. You just got to go in a different way.
Yeah. There you go.
Getting into a very different door. It's totally fine.
Right.
Yes.
Totally fine.
But I think that's something that people don't think about as an option too, and that can be something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, again, like Grassroots said, you can cover that in like an advanced directive, but I do like that. That's an excellent, excellent use. J. Michael would like a full fanfare, the full thing, all the honors.
Full salute, honor salute. I mean, this is a big business, right? The other thing, right? Enjoy your life now while you're living. Put your resources into life now. When I see people that spend, $20,000, $10,000, $15,000, for funerals and burials. And yes, it's great if you have those resources, but spend that time having a party for that person. Spend that money having a party. I'm such a fan of cremation and prepaying it and making it simple. And I get it if people's religion and defies that. But however, we're also running out of real estate and we're running out of room, and it's just you should not put that burden on your family if you have not already paid for it yourself. So just so you guys know, I'm a long story, but I'm adopted. So when my mother died, we looked at having her buried, her ashes buried on top of another grave of a family member. So it wasn't like the cemetery could sell that plot, right? They couldn't, it's an existing grave of another family member. It was going to be $9,000. That was 17 years ago. And I was like, yeah, no, like that's not happening.
That's wild.
Like what? I probably at this point I could have just dug the hole myself and put them in there. But, again, subsequently, that cemetery completely flooded out and it ended up being a bit of a mess. But yeah,
That's a mess. I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing.
No, it's okay to laugh.
This is image.
I was the only person, the youngest person in my family, the only person in my age group, my family. Everybody was like 100 years older than me when I was growing up. So I dealt with this a lot. And it was a very, okay, what's going on? What's this person having done? Things that I had to, talk about as a kid. So it's okay. Like, it's good to talk about these things and have these conversations. So, but, I'm just saying it's the expense of funerals it's outrageous. It's outrageous.
It's so expensive.
Go have a vacation and celebrate that person. Have a party.
Go on a cruise.
On a cruise.
For that much money, like go and do something that, you'll all remember and like.
Right. But don't pour the ashes off the bow of the boat. Is that the front of the boat? The bow? The aft? You want to do it off the aft.
It's very dark.
Okay. The wind, it's not, it just doesn't.
Yeah, picture the wind.
Yeah, and there's all those levels on the ship, and it's just not good. Yeah.
Please don't do that. Oh, for sure. Real quick, I just wanted to look at the different types of, because this kind of ties into the conversation, and then we can have a conversation a whole different day about, the ethics of medical assistance in dying, because that's like a whole thing. But before we do that, I was going to show you this earlier. And then I realized it was like an inappropriate thing for the conversation we're having, but I'm still going to show you. If you are a channel member, I made this so you can use it in the chat. It's an Air France, but did you die? So that's awkward for today. But if you are a channel member, you can use that. So that's fun. If you know, you know. I might make it into a sticker. We'll see. Trying to figure that out. And our other one we added is the villain, in case you need a villain, but this one's my favorite. But did you die? So that exists now. So there's our mouthwash for the comment section. This is a brief introduction into this topic. Like I said, I have a whole, because Canada's coming out with that medical assistance in dying thing, which I am all for. So I have a lot of more, so we'll probably incorporate that more in like a different chat, but here's just like a brief introduction to it in case you aren't familiar, and then we can have thoughts. But a lot of people were wondering, like, is this considered like what happened with this woman when she went in and shot her husband? Was this considered like a mercy killing or euthanasia? And I didn't know the difference, but thankfully someone at this newspaper also might not have, and like looked into all the questions I had. So it was it was technically, I guess it would be considered a mercy killing. A mercy killing is not legal in Florida. But they are having a lot more conversation about it because, as this article points out, there's a lot of people in Florida who are older and they are aging, and this is just going to become more and more of a topic, right? Because we also know that, like Adrian said, that's the population where you're going to see this happening in the most, of people wanting to die. What's the difference between all of these? So euthanasia is also like the same thing as mercy killing. That's just basically going and ending someone else's suffering with legal injection or shooting them in their hospital room. Maybe we would like not that option. That seems extreme. It's not legal anywhere in the United States and is considered murder. So we're going to avoid that one. That's not what anyone wants. Okay. People are going to call it that. But that's not what it actually is. This is something like, this is more what you would do for pets, right? Because they can't decide for themselves, but you could decide. We treat our animals better than humans, I think, at the end of life, where you're kind of like, wow, you're really suffering. Like, we will let you be done with that. That's what that is. There's also assisted suicide in the act of which is where a non-healthcare provider gives you a means to end your life. That is also illegal if it's not a healthcare provider. Medically assisted life ending, which we will try to use YouTube safety words, or physician assisted death or assistance in dying, is the act of providing prescribed medication for terminally ill, so people who are going to pass away, who meet serious qualifications, who can then administer it themselves. And this is legal in 10 states. And those 10 states are Oregon, Washington, Vermont, California, Colorado, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, New Jersey, Maine, and New Mexico. Montana decided it was fine, but they haven't passed like an actual law yet. If you live in Montana, let us know what's up with that. And I just think it's interesting. They say the closest thing that we have is a DNR or a living will. I don't think those things are in any way the same. So like we've talked about this whole time, a DNR, that's been our whole conversation, right? Is you're like not resuscitating you if your heart stops. But there's a big time jump between when you really start to decline at the end of life and quality is no longer there, and when your heart finally does stop. And this is where this conversation targets, right? It's saying, do you have to do that last leg? Or can you just say, hey, I know where this is heading. Let's skip the part that's brutal and awful. And when I'm starting to feel like absolutely junk and my quality of life is not there, should I be allowed to just say, I'm done? I want to control how this is done and go from there. Only if you live in those states are those things allowed. Florida does not allow it. Florida State Code 765-309 states nothing construed or to condone or authorize or approve mercy killing or euthanasia to permit any affirmative or deliberate act or omission to end life other than the natural dying process. And they specifically say that refusing medical care is not considered ending one's life. But again, there is a lot that happens even if you pull all intervention away. That timeline can still be very, very long, right? And very, very miserable. And I just think it's weird that we don't let people decide, hey, if the ending is not going to change, where are we here? This is, you have to be over 18 in all the states in the US to be able to do this. You have to be mentally competent to request it. You have to be diagnosed with a terminal illness that will lead to death in the next 6 months. And you have to be verified by a qualified healthcare provider. Usually in the things that I've seen, it has to be like 2 have to agree that that is where things are heading. And you have to be able to administer the medication yourself. There's a waiting period, so you can't just decide it and then go forward like the next day. And some states require a second waiting period. And you can change your mind at any time, right? If you decide this is just not for me, or even you don't can say, I'm just not going to take the medication at all. Biggest opposition to it is a lot of religious organizations seem to be against it, saying that it fundamentally contradicts the inalienable value of human life and therefore inherently and consequentially morally and religiously wrong and should be forbidden without exceptions. I think that's harsh. There's like a rejection of euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide group that promotes all of that. I think it's valuing life more than anything by saying this is my choice and it no longer has quality. So I'm just not going to suffer, right? We do that for our dogs. Again, I don't know why we don't do it for our humans. The American Medical Association, the greatest villain of them all, opposes it, saying that it's fundamentally inconsistent with a physician's role to, and their Hippocratic oath to do no harm. I would argue that letting someone suffer is doing harm. And then some people have said it's a slippery slope that leads to an expansion of justifications for harming people. Like, oh, are we just going to get rid of all the old people? Like, just let them all go. But that would be, it's not forced. It's always elective. And so I think that leaves that out of the conversation. Florida tried to pass this, a Death with Dignity Act in 2020. And they said no. They said, in Florida, this act is likely to become not anything for a very, 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 very long time, as it is, which is a shame because I think a lot of people in Florida could benefit from it. So there's that. Let us know in the chat what you think. Yes, villain emoji. Yes. I'm obviously very pro it, but
I think we lost Cal. Cal, you all right there, buddy?
Is he on mute?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. He was head down. I didn't know if he was head down in his soup or ice cream or what.
Cal stays up like 90 works like 90-hour weeks, guys. So that's why we're worried about him. We're like, did Cal just fall asleep?
This could open up a whole new field of medicine. Call it euthananology, and they be euthananologists, right? And it could be a field of medicine where you only have 1 or 2 visits with your doctor, and then that's the end of it. But they assist you through this process. They come in, they screen you, they make sure that you're right for it, that you actually do have a terminal situation, that things aren't going to get better, and then he writes you a prescription, or he sends you to the bed in the back, and he starts an IV and lets you go.
Yep. It is a weird form of control that we say, no, you can't decide that.
You know what? I would love to have. I think they do this in the Netherlands. That this is all legal in the Netherlands, as long as you have to do it yourself. You have to take the medication yourself, so on and so forth. But why can't we do that here? Why is it such a dirty word? I'm telling you right now, it's okay to die. I would like to pick the time and the day that I go. You know, if I've got a certain situation, a terminal illness or whatever, I'd like to go on Thursday at noon when the sun is shining, or what have you. You know, pick your situation. I want to pick my time and day. I don't want to be sitting there in a bed, wallowing in my own filth, having been a burden to my family for the last 2 years. They can't move on because I'm still alive. I can't move on because I'm still alive. It's okay to die.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was just going to say, and you don't have to choose it, which I think is the most frustrating thing for me, because a lot of people would come. I've argued about this. You'll be shocked to know. I've argued about this with a lot of people, and they're like, that's like they would take it like, they're like, well, yeah, I think if you do that, it will have this consequence in your after, like whatever they think. And I think then don't do it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, is like, you're applying your narrow construct of what should happen at this end of life and what your beliefs personally are. And that's affecting everyone else. And it's like, then don't do it. You are allowed to do, that's the whole point, is that you be allowed to pass and however you would like. And having seen countless people suffer at the end of their life because some disease processes are just miserable. And that's without intervention, right? That's just with pain meds. Pain meds only go so far. There's not a lot of quality of life there for a lot of people. And I just don't think people have seen that. And I would just encourage you to think about that before you jump to immediately saying no, I would never allow that. Or I think that's evil and of the devil. You know what I mean? Sad.
I mean, it's ironic though, because it's the same people will be about body autonomy. What I'm saying? I don't want to get into all of it, but about COVID, but These are the same people that are about body autonomy, you know, independence, less government, blah, 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 blah. But then we go pass laws about everybody else's body and, you know, trans people and everything else. Right. So it's like, make it all make sense. Right. I mean, I'm a Buddhist, right? We're just like on this planet, on this flying rock through space. We're not, you know, we're just in this borrowed skin and bones. And then we move on. And whatever your belief is about what that looks like, that's great. We get to all respect each other's beliefs, but not dictate to other people what they should do. Right. But at the same time, there is something very concrete about this, though, because if we don't really start getting millennials who are, you know, now getting older, obviously, and Gen Z really oriented to these conversations, right? Again, this is a group that is going to have the highest number of unwell years of any generation in the history of humanity. 15 on average, right? So the burden on the healthcare system and who's going to pay for this is going to be a conversation very quickly, right? In the next few decades. So it is really important that these conversations start happening, because if we don't just let people do what they want to do and make their choices, we're forcing the payment, you know, this to be in the system of medicine and healthcare and billing and be a burden on the health system that they don't want to be, right? And now if you want to have everything done, great. Okay, we'll do that for you. But again, there is going to be some breakdown. And trust me, man, we all know. I mean, Liz, you know, everybody knows medicine is changing right now, right? That's why Amazon's getting into medicine. Walmart's getting into medicine. We're going to, you know, why did they test the AI, you know, to see if it would pass the medical boards, right? Things are changing about healthcare delivery anyways.
Faux show. Cal, are you alive? He makes me worried.
Yes, that's what I was saying earlier. Is he still with us?
No, I just haven't slept from last night yet.
Go to bed.
Go to bed, man. Go to bed.
Bed.
Yeah.
You never have to stay forever. You know, we can talk for 8 years.
Yep.
You know it. It's allowed to be a flyby situation where you're like, hello, hey, here's my big feelings. All right, I'm going to go snuggle on this bed with my dog now.
Yeah. Get some rest, brother.
I'm not legally allowed to hold you hostage. So Adrian says.
And your dog's so cute. Your dog's so cute behind you, like waiting to snuggle with you.
He is not a snuggler.
Neither is mine. Mine hates affection. She's like, no.
But you know,
you can borrow mine. Mine is very snuggly. He actually won't let you leave him. That's our problem currently.
My German Shepherd, the same. Yeah, it's like
he needs some therapy, because that is his only issue. That's his only issue, is he can't be left alone or he flips out. Like he's like, I need people all the time.
Zero boundaries.
You know, we can't force you to do anything. I can't force you to eat a food. I can't force you to go to a place. I can't force you to do certain things. Why can I force you to live? Why do I think that I have the right to force you to live? If you're sick and uncomfortable and you're miserable, go.
Yep. Yes, indeed. I think it's part of it, I think, is, you know, people projecting their own beliefs on other people, right? Saying that, like, I believe this, so everyone must believe this. And two, money, right? Healthcare makes a lot of money off of people as to string them along, right? They're like, oh, well, we also could offer you this. We also could offer you this. Look at this. We could try this. And that's very profitable. I was trying to comment back when you were talking, reply to a comment, but now I lost. Oblio said, we need to create a chat room with communications for each other on these topics. Does anyone know how to create one? Discord is probably your best option if there's one out there like that. If you are a channel member on my channel, I think it's like, I think I made it as cheap as it could be. I have a private Discord server that like you can join if you're a channel member. And I did that just so that like it could be slightly, you know, there's like one slight barrier so that we don't get a bunch of trolls in there. But so that's tiny plug for that, but that exists. And it's kind of like a giant chat room, but I agree. These are interesting conversations, and thanks for being here, panel members. I don't know if I shouted you out today. How you interrupted my shout out to you. How dare ye? How dare ye? Please go check out all of these lovely people and their social medias down below. They have their own channels and they share all of their wisdom, and it's the best. So go follow them. They're wonderful humans. I will put all of their information in the description below. Also, everyone get hyped. Chad, you're invited. So are you, Mel. Adrian and I are going to go explore a Civil War museum as soon as I find out. I have like a random work trip I have to go on that could be at like any time, which makes planning life hard because I'm like, I just might randomly be in a very different state. But as soon as we figure that out, we're going to go look at horrifying wartimey thingies.
Horrifying
Stay tuned
medical
for that.
devices. Yes.
We'll probably live stream it on her TikTok or something if that's legal. Hopefully
That
it
sounds
is,
fabulous.
even if it's not. It'll probably just be a stream of us just like giggling and being like, "Oh my god!"
It could be
That
the.
sounds
It could be
fabulous. And
the.
probably towards my old Maryland home.
It could be the material for a podcast. Just
There you
saying.
go. Just saying.
Just saying.
Just saying. If one of those was around the corner for someone, just saying. Hypothetically. Hypothetically. Neuralia said, how many patients have you seen who had an attempt that was unsuccessful and suffered horrible health complications from that failure?
When I worked in the SNF, there's a couple, like I said, that had suffered traumatic brain injuries, something like this, and they were alive for another 20 years. Nothing above the brainstem, but we were turning them every 2 hours, changing their diapers. They're sitting in their own filth. They've got tube feedings. That is no way to live. They can't move on. Their families can't move on. As I said before, turn the page, let them go.
Yeah. And so I've had a few people who attempted and then their outcome was poor. And then it was just like, it's very difficult. Then there was a lot of trauma within the family of them being like blaming the person of why were you doing this? That's another reason why I'm a huge proponent of making something like this legal, because the legal version is pretty foolproof. And also it is something that there's a lot less, I don't know. It's just like a lot less foolproof. Your family would be in on it, right? It wouldn't be this thing. Cause when people do it on their own, it's usually hidden. I've never really had people come out and be like, hey, I'm going to tell my whole family that on this day at this time, I'm going to try to do this. Like I've said, they told me and I was like, please stop speaking. Like stop talking. Don't tell me, because then I have to ask certain questions. So I think having it be legalized also gives you a great avenue for having that be less of a situation where someone attempts something and it doesn't work and then they're even worse off, which is absolutely awful, in my opinion. Thoughts?
I think that it's important to realize that even if you have, I know what the different religions' beliefs are about this, and I respect if people have that struggle, right? However, it's still happening, right? So if we just talk about non-aging, non-health issue related, assisted, end of life, it's still happening, right? And so it's really important that we look realistically, but understand that any decisions or thoughts people are having as an elderly couple or as somebody with a terminal illness. I mean, again, hospice came out as a result of HIV and AIDS and cancer, taking care of cancer patients. That's all that came about. That's how home health started, basically, is through that hospice home health. So these are not things that are taken lightly. People are thinking about it and they're struggling and they're torturing themselves and they're talking to their ministers, their pastors, they're, reconciling their concept of what happens after we're gone, and so it's important to respect that and understand these are not just knee-jerk decisions. And I respect how people struggle with these decisions and desires. And it's okay. Like we get to support people in creating the life that they want to have. And then how do they want to go? And this is, again, I think why, if people are open, they should really explore a death doula at least. So it's, again, nothing about assisted suicide, nothing about assisting that end of life, but it's about assisting you in having how you want your final days to look, and making that happen, whether it's just making a photo album for you or, taking you to a movie, right? Or whatever it is. So, explore those options, you guys.
For sure. I'm going to go back through and do any questions that I kind of saw now. So if you guys have any questions, thoughts, whatever, let me know. If you have a question for a specific person, you can put that in there. And that's what we're going to go through right now really quick. Kelly Leah said, are insurance companies aware when someone has a DNR? Not like they could go digging and find it if they looked through your chart, but not really. No, it's not something like a code. You don't put when you're entering information, the insurance company receives notes and then codes of like, I want you to bill it like this. And there's no code for this person as a DNR. So no, they don't really know. So they shouldn't. When you cross over into hospice, that's a different story. So hospice is care targeted at end of life, where you are now switching over to just like providing comfort measures. You're no longer treating to cure something. You're going towards end of life. That is the only time when insurance really knows, because then insurance will no longer cover treatment. It will only cover like life comfort measures, so that they would know of. But other than that, I'm not aware of why insurance would know. Can you guys think of anything where insurance would know?
No. And it
No,
would
I
be
don't
really not a good idea.
No.
Yeah, no. Let's not give them any ideas. Okay.
Yeah, they'd withdraw all services, and then you would be up a creek.
Yes. Let's not give them any ideas about that, because that's where I feel like it would be. AdCamp says they see regularly where things don't go well and then they end up in like the trauma ICU. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that. I'm grateful that you do, but I don't know how you do that. Comfort care, AdCamp says, I love when patients go for comfort care, not because they're dying, but because the reality of patient condition is accepted. And the care decision aligns with that reality. So comfort care, if you don't know, is basically like inpatient hospice. So a different word for just like, we're just going to try to make you comfortable. Also a huge proponent of palliative care. Not that we're super
Palliative
talking
versus
about that
hospice,
today.
They're not the same. Yeah.
Exactly. And they're not
Or
the
not
same.
always the same, rather. Yeah.
Mhm. Hospice is like sort of a subset of palliative, but palliative does a lot of other things. So if you feel like if you're living with a chronic illness, palliative care, your friend. Ask your healthcare provider for a palliative care team, because they can do a lot of things. It's pretty great. Let me see. Anyone else see any questions? My brain is like skipping all over the place. It won't think. Or focus. But I think that's all of them that I saw. Anyone else?
I didn't see anything else.
Adrian's muted. You're muted, Adrian.
Oops, sorry. It's important to have I saw a CPR comment. Yeah, I mean, I'm 220 pounds. I was a shot putter. Whether or not I could be 120 pounds. But if you're going to have an elderly person getting CPR, especially female, or just anybody over 75, right? I mean, there's going to be broken ribs. And then now those ribs are going to interfere with breathing. So now that, grandma, your mom is going to be intubated and, on a vent, end up with a trach. There's just all kinds of fallout from that, right? And so that the recovery from CPR could be actually then the thing that leads to demise. So it is really important that people understand what CPR is. And I would have that conversation with patients. I would say, I want you to take a look at me. And I would have this conversation with the family members. And I would say, I want you to take a look at me. I will be on top of your mom, on top of your dad, and I will be doing CPR. And my job is to make sure that I am manually pumping their heart with the pressure I am applying, which has to go through the sternum. And I would have them actually feel their sternum. And I think that's a very good idea. And say, okay, imagine what it would take or how often in your life you've hit that. Punch yourself in the sternum. It's not going to break easy. I'm going to break it so I can pump that heart. Yep. It is very important that you have those realistic conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and tell them, if CPR is done right, if I'm going to do this right, the first time I go down, I'm going to shatter every rib in their chest. And sometimes, and that becomes a situation where the cure is worse than the disease, because now I've punctured their lung, may have punctured the pericardial sac. Don't know. Mm-hmm. And so now we are. What did we gain?
Right.
What did
and at
we
least
gain?
give, and like when we talked about this last time, everyone was like, well, what if they still wanted it? And that's totally fine, guys. That's not what we're arguing for at all. I'm arguing for informed consent so that people know, because I have encountered so many more times people on the other end of it who are like, I did not know that it would be like that. Like, you know what I mean? So that's all we're saying. If you would still like that after, like, you know, that is what we're like. That's what I'm here for. I would like you to be able to receive the care that you would like to receive, but I would just like you to know it's my job as a healthcare provider to explain the risks and the benefits of this for you. Okay. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job, and that's not fair. Our end patient said, not a question, but just to add that everyone should do end of life planning. All about it. Here for that. I'm 26, not terminal, but had these discussions now with my family when I was diagnosed with cancer. And I feel like a lot of times it comes down to that, where you have something like that, a diagnosis like that. Also, I hope you're doing okay, getting and feeling okay. I know it's been a long little road there for you. You don't have to wait for a catalyst like that. Just have the conversation, like we mentioned, over whatever news event you want to bring up after you trap your person in the car, like Mr. Midwife said, and spring it on them. Go for it. You can do it. You can do it.
November's doom. He's got a question there. Statute of limitation. What's your question, November?
No, I don't know. Like, does it ever expire? Your whatever, like your wishes? I don't think so. Once they're there, they're kind of there. And then you have to update them if you want anything different. You know what I mean? It has to be totally different. Trying to see if there was a comment before that. But no, I don't think so. Hollywood's version of CPR is laughable 99% of the times. You can't watch healthcare TV shows once you know what happens. I'm sure that's like any field, but you're like, no. No.
And everybody lives. Everybody makes it.
Yes, they do.
99%
do great.
of the time.
Yeah.
Every pregnant woman has her water break. She delivers within 3 minutes in the back of the car.
Yep. It's fascinating.
Or she
Fascinating how that works every
delivers
time.
in the taxi miraculously with a taxi
Right.
driver or somebody, or the Uber driver, right? So
Right.
yeah, so just be informed, you guys. I mean, it sounds like a lot of heavy stuff we talked about, but really, knowledge is power, and having these conversations brings peace of mind. So just think about the peace of mind, the gift that you're going to give your family by having these conversations. And if you are, have a family, bring the family together. And it could be, hey, we're going to meet at Thanksgiving. The next time everybody's together, Easter, whatever holiday, or next time you're getting together with your family, set aside time and let a couple people know, enroll a couple people in the family to support you, right? So that there's not a bunch of pushback, and say, here, we're going to have a conversation. I want you guys to understand what it is I want. And if you want to share with me what your thoughts are, what you'd want, let's talk about it. Let's just start talking about it.
Agreed. You're very good at closing these things. Well done. Way to go. Let us know what your thoughts are. Yeah, down below. Also, what you would like to be turned into when you die. What do you want to happen to you? I think that we'll see some. That's always an interesting, fascinating thing. That could be your conversation starter at Thanksgiving as you go around the table. Instead of everyone saying what you're thankful for, be like, what do you want to be turned into when I bury you? Am I burying you? What are we doing? What's happening? And see where the conversation goes. It'll be fascinating. Thanks for being here and chatting. Again, go check out all these lovely humans down below. And yeah, we'll see what, I think there's other conversations surrounding this. We'll talk about the medical assistance in dying. Big thoughts, especially when it comes to psychiatric care related to that. Big feelings. But thanks for being here, friends. I hope you learned a little bit of something, got some new insight. Go do your homework. Go talk about something like this with one person. Okay. Find out or share I didn't mean to do that yet. And remember that you are not alone. You're more than enough, and you can do all the hard things. Bye, friends. Bye. Did you have any other thoughts, or did I cut all of you off?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I realized that after. I was like, I didn't even ask. Mel,
I mean,
any
the
final
conversation
thoughts?
could kind of be endless. So
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. So we'll do the, what is it?
To
The
be
Irish
fair.
goodbye, where we're just all of a sudden, we're like, okay, bye. We're
Yeah,
done.
that's how I do
This
it.
is the song that never ends.